Good afternoon, everybody. Feel free to leave your videos on if you are willing and able. It's nice to see people as we give our presentations.
Hello.
Hello, Sean. I'm just going to make you a co-host. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. Perfect. I'm sure everybody can as well. So let me just co-host you. Do you have presentation slides?
I do. They're not as pretty as I wanted, but I have them.
No, just your face is enough. The slides is overkill. We're going to start in a couple of minutes.
No problem.
Okay, let us get going for today. Welcome to the Queer Politics webinar number 14. Thank you all for joining us today. And we are excited to have Sean Meloy joining us today, who I'll introduce in a second, who's going to talk to us about the Victory Fund's work and the state of play for LGBTQ candidates in the upcoming November elections in America. So both at the national, the congressional, state level, and local elections as well. I should just remind you that next week we have Brian Harrison and Melissa Michelson talking about their new book, Transforming Prejudice. And we'll continue on the series with some other fabulous presentations through October and November. Similar format, if you haven't been with us before, we're going to take approximately half the time with Sean giving us a presentation about the November elections, and then we'll take comments, questions, conversation. If you would like to ask a question or have a comment, please send me a note in chat. I'll put you on the list, and at any time. You don't have to tell me what the question is. If you are interested in leaving on your video cam, it's nice to see people's faces and get some feedback as our presenters present, but there's no obligation to do that. As I said, we're very lucky to have with us today Sean Meloy, who is obviously a very busy man right now over the next few weeks and months. Sean is the political director at the Victory Fund and has been for a little while now. And formerly, he was the director of LGBT engagement in the DNC at the Democratic National Committee. Long history working with political campaigns and also campaigning himself. Originally from Pittsburgh, a graduate of Penn State and a political student at Penn State, and is currently the chair of the LGBTQ caucus of the Pennsylvania Democratic Party as well. So I think all of us are particularly interested in the raft of candidates and their chances of victory and the pressures they're facing in the November American elections. I would guess, and Sean's going to tell us in more detail, but I would guess that there's the prospect for an increase in descriptive representation that is a magnitude larger than we've ever seen before. I think that over the last few decades, we've seen incremental gains, but I think this election could potentially see a significant change in the visible representation of queer people at every level of governance. And also, interestingly, I think many of us are interested in the intersections of race, of gender, of sexual orientation and gender identity. And perhaps this new cohort of elected officials is going to be slightly less white, slightly less male than it was before. And we're seeing more people of color represented at local and state and national level as well. So without further ado, let me hand it over to Sean, who will take us through the state of play and the likely prospects. And we'll take some questions after about half an hour.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Nice to see you again. As he said, I'm Sean Meloy, the Senior Political Director at LGBTQ Victory Fund. And if you're not familiar with Victory, we are a two-part organization. We have our C3, the Victory Institute. This works to help train and prepare LGBTQ people to run for office, as well as to serve in government. And after they get elected, they help ensure that elected and appointed officials have a network and resources to help make sure that they can succeed while they're in office. They also are going to be working in the next administration, hopefully Joe Biden's administration, as they did with Barack Obama's administration, to help ensure that appointments into the government are on par with our population's diversity, as well as adequately represented. We've never had an open cabinet secretary, a permanent cabinet secretary that was openly LGBTQ. We've never had an openly LGBTQ Supreme Court justice. We actually have very few LGBTQ people who are openly serving on the federal benches. And so making sure that those considerations are taken part is some of the work the Victory Institute does. But when an LGBTQ person is actually running for office, they're with the Victory Fund. We're a multi-candidate PAC. We've got a super PAC as well as a federal PAC, and PACs in a bunch of different states where we legally need to in order to engage. We work to identify, recruit, and elect LGBTQ people to office. As you'll see, we don't endorse every LGBTQ candidate. We do try to track every single LGBTQ candidate that runs, but in order to earn our endorsement, you have to be openly LGBTQ and commit to fighting for our community while you're in office. You have to believe in the fundamental right of privacy and reproductive freedoms. So we were founded almost 30 years ago. A lot of the sodomy laws, bedroom laws, HIV medication access. Right now, choice is the biggest marker there, but also viable. You have to have an actual plan to win, and you have to be working towards that plan. You can have a great plan, but if you fundraise nothing, then you're not really a viable candidate. And so those are our three main criteria. We really focus in on candidates that are historic, that they're going to be the first, they're going to bring a needed voice. So this year, that's a lot of transgender candidates, a lot of people of color, women, and folks running in low equality states. And this is a great resource for you all. This is the Out for America map that the Victory Institute runs. This is all of the openly LGBTQ elected officials in the United States right now that we've been able to identify. So please feel free to look and see if anyone's missing. We just found some folks in Florida, but we're at 863 people in the entire United States of America. In some states like South Dakota and Mississippi, we don't have anyone at all. In many others, we have very few or one. That's 0.17% of all elected officials in the United States of America. In order to get to 4.5%, which is a very low bar, right? Andrew and I have discussed this. The low bar of 4.5% of LGBTQ people in the general population, we need to elect over 22,000 more folks just to get to that lowest bar. And if you're looking at Generation Z and the way they're identifying as LGBTQ+, they're in the double digits. They're in the 8 to 12% range. And every generation, that has come out, right? The greatest generation is at 3%. Baby boomers are more at 6%. Millennials are at 8%, but Generation Z is identifying at a much higher rate. So, but we use 4.5%. You can see some of the offices, the high offices we need to get to. 186 more state legislators, executives, senators, really building a pipeline to make sure that these folks are happening. And that's some of the important work that's happening this year. Now, I also have to mention that this is just if we elect an LGBTQ person, right? This does not necessarily mean that that will be the full diversity of our community. 22,000, cisgender, white, gay men is not going to be effective representation, but we're going to work towards making sure that it is indeed. And so just to look at what we've done so far this year, today we're going to announce our last round of endorsements for 2020. That's going to bring our overall endorsed candidates to 387. That is an organizational record, about 100 more than we had in 2018, which we dubbed the Rainbow Wave. We're looking to figure out what we're going to call this and probably years moving forward, as we're hoping that this is a trend line. We've identified around 1,000 candidates. 2 people emailed me this morning saying, hey, I filed late, there's a special election, right? So we continue to find more, but we do believe it's going to be over 1,000. It was slightly over 800 in 2018 of the folks that we identified, but this is a record in our organizational history as well. Victory also works to help support our candidates. We've bundled over $1.6 million for our endorsed candidates. A large chunk of that was for Mayor Pete, who I'll talk about in a minute, but over $1 million of that is for the other 386 candidates. Really less than 300, as 77 of them are being announced today, so we haven't been able to fundraise for them yet. And then this is just kind of a look at where those candidates are. 40% of them have gone through the Victory Institute training. Let me just move this. 47% of those, almost half, are running in low equality states. And so we use the Movement Advancement Projects criteria for this, and that be medium or less. And so primarily we focus a lot of our resources in candidates who are running in the states where we have a lot of gains to make when it comes to non-discrimination, conversion therapy, repealing some of the anti-LGBTQ laws that are on the books, gender markers, all those kind of things. But we use Movement Advancement Project data for that. Over half of our candidates are state ledge candidates. I actually do think that's going to adjust today. I don't know if that's necessarily been updated, but still really high in level of importance to us, because that is where most pro and anti-LGBTQ legislation emanates from, is in the state legislative bodies. I'll talk about those a little bit in a minute. And then less than 8% of our folks are actually federal candidates. And so those are folks who are running for Congress. That is actually lower now as well. And then this is just some breakdown of where we are. Overall, we still get a lot of gay, white, cisgender men, right? They are the majority of our candidates. However, it is decreasing from past years. It's been as high as 68% in the last 5 years. That is now down to 55% for cisgender men. White candidates are still almost a super majority of our candidates, but we are making inroads. AFAM and Latinx really are growing from 2018, slightly, but definitely more. One area where we are definitely struggling though this year is in the AAPI community, not keeping up with the percentage of their population in the United States. And so that's a significant problem. We just endorsed a ton of folks, but a lot of the folks that we have endorsed are located in California as well as Georgia, very few outside of both of those states. But this year we also have a lot more gender non-conforming as well as non-binary candidates, as well as pansexual and bisexual candidates. There's less than 30 bisexual folks elected in the United States. We could easily double that, possibly triple that this year. And so that's a real big gain. Obviously, there's also the identification of pansexual, which we've seen increase in the last few years as well. A better representation of where some folks fall. And then we've had some results already this year, right? Some local elections happen and they've succeeded. We've had 14 people win this year, so their elections are finished. They're already serving. 10 of those folks are new. We've also had our last primaries were on last week in Delaware. And so of the 387 folks, we had 49 people lose, which actually is not that bad in our estimation. A lot of them were running in very contentious primaries. We also did lose 5 incumbents. Most of those incumbents were around for a while, and they were defeated actually primarily by younger women of color who were deemed more progressive in the Democratic primary electorate. There was also one Republican incumbent who was outflanked on the right that we lost in Utah. And I can't start talking about the other parts of our work this year without leading with Mayor Pete. Mayor Pete has changed the game in a way when he ran for president and won Iowa. This was our first ever presidential endorsement. Fred Karger ran in the Republican primary. He didn't really file in a lot of states, didn't get votes, wasn't in the debates. Mayor Pete was there. People saw him. And one of his biggest media narratives was that he was gay, he was married to a man, and that he was running and was proud of his identity. I can't overstate the impact this has had on LGBTQ people. It's now possible, right? It's now possible. I myself never thought in my life I would see someone who is gay running for president. And, he is a gay, white, cisgender man, but he went much further than many people thought he would. Victory obviously endorsed him, supported him, and helped raise money for him. And a lot of LGBTQ elected officials supported him, as did a lot of LGBTQ donors, right? They might have liked a different candidate more, but they also ended up donating to Pete because of the historic nature of his race. Let me see, I see some questions. I don't know if, oh, okay.
We'll take those at the end, yeah.
All right. And so, We have talked to a few folks who said they've been inspired, right? But there's definitely been an influx, I think, on the side of the Victory Institute. They've told us that a lot of folks are looking to get trained because they see it's now possible. And so, Mayor Anise Parker is our CEO. You can see her there with Pete. She was the first mayor of a major city, LGBTQ mayor of a major city. We now have another mayor in Lori Lightfoot. And we have Danica Rome. These are big milestones that we've had, and Mayor Pete is kind of putting a cherry on top of those wins in regards to encouraging people who haven't thought it was possible to step up and run for office to think it is in the realm of possibility. And obviously we'll be working to help make sure that they're prepared to do that and supporting them when they do that. But it really has changed. And it does seem like 2-3 years ago that this was happening, but this was only 6 months ago. And so we're still seeing those effects. And the other thing I wanted to mention here is that Victory started to work on, supporting Mayor Pete in many ways. He dropped out, shortly after he won in Iowa. However, one of the things that we've been able to do is a first time ever model of voters on what their support for an LGBTQ candidate might be. And so we just launched this. We are still working to get it out, but we worked with the Equality Federation. We worked with a few other folks to help make sure it works. But basically, the model is going to allow us to use it in these races where we've got an LGBTQ candidate. And we now know that there are voters who will be more excited to vote for an LGBTQ candidate. We also know that there are some voters that will be turned off by the fact that someone is openly LGBTQ. And I don't think it will be surprising to anyone here that those trend lines are very similar to the partisan trend lines we see. More liberal folks are more excited about an LGBTQ candidate. More conservative folks are more disgruntled by it. However, when it comes to our LGBTQ candidates moving up the ladder and engaging in politics at a higher level with a higher level of sophistication, we imagine this model is going to be used to help make sure that that happens. All right, let's see here. I'm not moving. There we go. And so I just want to talk about some of our strategy for this year. It's a 4-part strategy. And so I'm just going to go through. We had some amazing wins already this year. And so on the left here, you see some of our primary results. We've never had an openly LGBTQ state senator in Georgia, in Florida, or Delaware, or Oregon. We now will have those. These are safer Democratic seats where our candidate has won the Democratic primary. Greg Razor is going to go to the state Senate. He's currently in the state House of Missouri. We haven't had someone there since Jolie Justice was there. So we now have a voice there again. Many folks may remember a few years ago, after Jolie was termed out of office, she had helped steward non-discrimination through the Republican-led state Senate. After she left, one of the most anti-LGBTQ bills in the country's history ended up passing through that chamber. And so that's a testament to our belief that an LGBTQ voice in the room, in the chamber, helps change the trajectory of a lot of legislation. We also had some amazing trans candidates win their primaries and are poised for victory. In Kansas, Stephanie Byers is in a more Democratic majority seat, as well as Taylor Small in Vermont. We were very close in 2 other states, Maine and New York. New York has still never elected an openly transgender person to public office. And then we have some other firsts in the Hawaii House. We haven't had representation for quite some time. Adrian Tam is running. He still has a little bit of a race against a Proud Boy he's running against. Roger Stone just endorsed him, so it's going to be an interesting race when it comes to the rhetoric, I think. And then in the Delaware House, we just had 2 folks win as well. I'm sorry, that's Eric Morrison in the House and Marie Pickney is in the Senate. And so we went from a state that has never elected anyone to having 3 folks elected. There are still some states that have never had an openly LGBTQ legislator: Mississippi, Tennessee, Alaska, Delaware, as mentioned, and Louisiana. Those are the last states that we've got to break that barrier in. And we've broken a lot of those barriers within the last 2 cycles. And then coming up this fall, we've got some opportunities to win in Tennessee and Alaska, as well as the South Dakota House, a chamber we've never been in. South Dakota, as I'm sure many of you know, has been where a lot of anti-LGBT, especially anti-trans legislation has been moving within the last 2 years. There's no LGBTQ person elected in the entire state. And we haven't had someone in legislature for almost 10 years. So we feel like both these candidates, Jared and Louise, have a real good shot. Same thing with Tory and Brandon in Tennessee, another place where we're seeing a lot of anti-LGBTQ legislation move. The Ohio State House, this is an important seat that we think is actually very possible. Zach's running a great campaign in a suburban district, trending towards Democrats. We don't have a voice in the Ohio State House, so we're really excited about that race, as well as the North Dakota State Senate. We don't have anyone there right now. And in these low equality states, having that voice is just extremely important. We also have a couple other trans candidates that I want to flag. In the Wisconsin House, Jessica Katzenmeyer is running. This is a, I would say, tier 2 seat that is moving into potentially tier 1 status. This is going to be a ride or die with, I think, the Democratic wave and the amount of support she's able to get. And then one of the 4 currently elected trans state legislators in the country is the #1 target of Republicans in Colorado, Breonna Tattone. So this district is one we're watching. I wanted to flag. We don't want to lose any of our trans legislators. We actually might potentially double them this year. But Breonna is definitely being targeted already. She was not expected to win. I would say underestimated, probably partially because of her identity in 2018, and she won. But she is the Republicans' #1 pickup opportunity there. And then also we've got a ton of, no, I wouldn't say a ton, but we've got some really viable candidates that are running in, I'm calling super districts. These are races that are key not only to helping flip a chamber, get representation for LGBTQ people, but also impact up-ticket races. North Carolina, Marsha Morgan. We've got Roy Cooper running against one of the architects of HB2. We've got the Senate race for Cal Cunningham. We've got the electoral votes for Joe Biden, right? And so we're marketing these candidates in that way. If these folks win, it's going to look good for a lot of those up-ticket candidates as well. Florida, a fight for the chamber there. Pennsylvania, a fight for the chamber there. Obviously, the electoral votes as well. Texas is very much in play for the state house. There's a Senate race, and Joe Biden is just putting a ton of money down there right now, so could be very competitive for the electoral votes and Senate race. In Colorado, David Ortiz is the #1 Democratic offensive target, and so he's just fantastic. One to mention that bisexual men are extremely underrepresented. He is running openly. He's a Latinx veteran who was wounded in service. An amazing candidate who's I think poised for victory if he gets the support. And then in Kansas, this is a state where we might be able to have LGBT representation for one of the first times. New Hampshire, we kind of have it right now. In Colorado, we'll be able to have it if David wins. But Kansas is a place where we had never elected anyone. In 2018, Victory made significant investments to help make sure that that happens. And so moving there. I'm way behind. A lot of local races. Here we had a bunch of wins. The ones I really want to flag are the Montana Secretary of State race, right? Very, very ride or die with the Senate race and gubernatorial race, which are being run up there, as well as the Washington Lieutenant Governor. Marco Elias is a current state senator there. He is in a runoff against another Democrat. He is actually really doing quite well, but he is running against a former Congressman, Denny Heck. But this would be a really important position, right? Who knows what Jay Inslee, the current governor, is going to do should Joe Biden win. But when it comes to building the pipeline of statewide offices, this is huge. We've also got some law and order candidates, some women running for sheriff. We've had great success there before. And just want to also flag that it's very interesting that some of our LGBTQ incumbents were targeted this year for recalls. Both our governors, Jared Polis and Kate Brown, were targeted for recalls. They both failed, as was Jenny Durkin in Seattle, the queer mayor of Seattle. And we're still running the numbers. It's hard to tell, but it's interesting that those efforts were undertaken against LGBTQ incumbents and not necessarily their straight counterparts. And then in Congress, we've already had some amazing wins. Mondaire Jones, Richie Torres. I have a whole slide on combating homophobia, which is the biggest issue facing us right now. And then also Georgette Gomez, Beth Doglio, and John Hoadley. key primary wins, but key general elections for us as well. As you can see, we also have some other candidates that are running a little redder districts. Pat Hackett, Tracy Matrano, they're doing what they need to do and to be best positioned for the fall. We also have 3 freshmen that were elected in 2018 that are vulnerable, Angie, Charisse, and Chris. This obviously coincides with us preparing for redistricting. And, you know, one thing I did want to flag for all of you is the LGBTQ communities of interest. This is when they draw the lines, actually ensuring that LGBTQ people have a voice and drawing a district around voters and citizens that are LGBTQ. There's been great success in this in California. Equality California worked with a lot of folks to help make sure this happened. We're hopeful to help make this happen as the lines get drawn for the 2020s as well. And then lastly, we did a really good job of making sure LGBTQ people were represented at the Democratic National Convention, even though it didn't really happen in person. And that was counter to a lot of messaging as well as the actions on the right. And so we were happy to help make sure that the platform, a lot of our elected officials engaged to help make sure that the platform was the most LGBTQ inclusive in history, and the most LGBTQ delegates ever were elected to the DNC. And then I'll close with, you know, this year, the issue of homophobia has reared its head more than we've ever seen, partially because our candidates are running in very competitive districts. They're running for higher offices, but at the same time, people seem a lot more open to using outright homophobia rather than dog whistles. We always see dog whistles, we always have, but the overt homophobia that we're seeing this year is a bit mystifying. You know, in Florida, we had robo-texts around, you know, saying that Chevron Jones, who's going to be a state senator now, he won, he overcame this, but talking about how he couldn't donate blood because he's gay. You know, Alex Morse, I don't know if any of you followed this. This was a primary. Alex ended up losing, but this was a concocted scheme to allege that he was basically a predator on college students. We saw some atrocious reporting from the media around this, and it clearly impacted his race. He did end up raising more money than he probably would have without it, but it did have a chilling effect on the momentum that he was having in that race. Really, books can be written about just this occurrence. Victory was very much defending and trying to get the media to report properly on this. Scott Wiener in San Francisco right now, he helped move an equality bill through the chamber. And he has been the #1 target of QAnon for like the last month and a half. Anti-Semitic, homophobic attacks, you know, death threats, all kinds of terrible things. And as the cycle continues, we do think that, you know, the QAnon, right, the overall idea that of hatred being fomented by Donald Trump and the Republican Party in this election is emboldening folks to help attack our candidates using some tropes that we haven't seen for some while, including, you know, sex offenders, pedophiles. You know, just this week, a Republican in Illinois, you know, was racist and homophobic. She was talking to a stranger and she used racism and homophobia, felt that was okay in her attempt to raise money. We've called that out, but just a lot of different pieces of evidence that this is growing. Council member Richie Torres, we were very, very involved in helping make sure that he beat his homophobic opponent, Ruben Diaz Sr. However, we did not see as much homophobia in the election as we're actually seeing in the aftermath with the police union, as well as you know, Ruben Diaz Sr. and some of his ilk coming after Richie now that he's basically a congressperson elect. And the biggest race right now is John Hoadley. This is a red to blue race in Michigan around Kalamazoo. He is a current state legislator. He's been in the pipeline for a long time. He is supported by Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, all kinds of amazing folks. And they're just outright calling him a pedophile, a drug user, outright lies that they're manipulating from a blog post almost 10 years ago. And not true at all. And it's just very disappointing to see the lies be used against such a capable candidate. We're very much engaged in this, as we will be for the next 40 days, but we've got a long way to go, and we don't know what else is going to happen in a lot of these districts where these folks are running, these state legislative races that are targeted. They're trending. Their polls are showing that they're ahead, and we think that folks are going to start throwing homophobia, along with everything else in the kitchen sink, at our candidates. So we're going to continue to monitor that and see what the actual effects on them are. And that's my contact information. And I ran a little late, but I'm happy to take questions.
No, that was perfect, Sean. We actually started at about 5 past, so you were exactly at the 30-minute mark. Thank you so much. I have a couple of questions, but I'm going to wait until we've had some of our guests ask questions first. Before I go to Russell Robinson for the first question, I do want to editorialize slightly and say that in watching this scene over the last decade, I really applaud your and Mayor Parker's leadership. I think how the Victory Fund is operating right now and the level of success that you're experiencing, I think is a demonstration of how well the leadership has gone at Victory. And I really appreciate your sterling work and Mayor Parker's work. It's been really impressive, in some ways, transformation of the organization. So that's fabulous for all of those who are engaged and supporters of descriptive representation. Then it's been very impressive. So thank you for that. Let us turn to Russell for the first question.
Thanks, John. This is really interesting, and I learned a lot. And I'm looking forward to seeing what unfolds with this election and the possible gains that you indicated. I had a question about the requirements for endorsement by the Victory Fund. I think you indicated that the candidates have to believe in reproductive rights and a right to privacy. And I wondered if you have any standards with respect to support for transgender rights and also racial equality, especially when candidates are running for law enforcement positions like attorney general or sheriff.
Yeah, you have to be openly LGBTQ, and we say be supportive of the full diversity of the LGBTQ community. So we have had candidates that were disqualified because they don't think transgender people are part of our community. We have had folks, I wouldn't say often, but disqualified because they had a very anti-immigrant attitude, kind of a racist kind of attitude, right? And we have our endorsement board that kind of makes those determinations. And so we take those, case by case. There's also varying levels of reproductive freedom, right? We don't define that you have to be opposed to Hyde Amendment restrictions, right? If for some of our Southern candidates, right, they believe that, abortion should be, limited to X, Y, and Z, right? We have those conversations on a case by case basis, but overall, you have to believe and fight for the full diversity of our community. And I think that's taken on new meaning, obviously, this year. And our endorsement board has definitely taken that into consideration this year.
Thanks.
Okay, let us take a question from Pancho Malungeni.
Yes, thank you. And this is following on Russell's question. We had a presentation earlier this year on Pete Buttigieg and why Pete Buttigieg actually, perhaps one of the reasons he did not make it. That survey analysis was so fascinating. And one of the things that really came out there was that a lot of transgender people were not supportive of Pete. And I just want you to please elaborate on that. Why is it? Why would that be the case? And how does this relate to sort of the politics of respectability and conformism? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a lot. I would say, Pete ran as an openly LGBTQ candidate, and so I don't think necessarily focused in on talking about LGBTQ rights overall or advancement to the degree as some of the other candidates did. I don't know if it's because Pete was in the race that other candidates really keyed in and helping make sure that trans voices, Black trans women, trans women of color were uplifted. But the work of Kamala before she dropped out, as well as Elizabeth Warren, were very much, I would say, above the outreach of the Pete campaign, and love him to death. But, you know, Pete's message was very much, you know, this is my identity, but it is not all that I am. And I think that what we see a lot of the time in criticism, right? We had a candidate in Mississippi, he sadly lost on Tuesday, but over the weekend, there was an article about him that was done by LGBTQ Nation. One of his opponents had printed it out and was passing it in traffic, right? Passing it out to cars at intersections. And they were saying that he hadn't run openly enough as a gay candidate. I mean, he has our seal on his website, right? If anyone who knows him, you know, knows that he's an out candidate. And what we sometimes see is that if you're an LGBTQ candidate and you lead with LGBTQ issues, people accuse you of only caring about those issues. And if you, you know, you're too gay, and then, however, you know, in the case of Mississippi, right, he wasn't gay enough. He wasn't so truthful. He wasn't waving the flag with every action he took during the campaign. And so I think that's a factor for Mayor Pete, and I think that's true of a lot of our other candidates. But, you know, to the second part of your question, I think we could go on at a long road. But like I said, you know, he is, you know, a cisgender white gay man, and I would say consistently, right, through the history of LGBTQ representation, the people with that identity were the first to run, to be emboldened or enabled to run, to build the resources to run a viable campaign. And we are seeing a marked increase in queer women running. We actually have data that shows queer women win more often than queer men. But overall, you know, women and people who are of any minority group within our community, writ large, right, do not necessarily have the same supports, do not have the same encouragement to run. And so, you know, it's not surprising that some folks didn't jive with Mayor Pete's message, and are not still running at the level that we need them to.
Great. Let me jump in with a question to follow up on that before I call Gabrielle. About Pete Buttigieg, I think many observers would not be surprised if he's in the cabinet, in Biden's cabinet with a senior position. Could you talk a little bit more about the prospects for trying to diversify the government's appointees and in non-elected positions throughout, you know, various wings of the US government, actually to see a much more and obviously very different, vibrant representation of America at that level? And does Pete's appointment sort of, do you see it as sort of in isolation, or is there going to be a systematic push to diversify the talent base across the board, from food and agriculture to State Department to Homeland, whatever it may be? And is anybody sort of thinking about that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Victory is going to be in our 30th year next year. And so we're going to be rolling out a new strategic plan. And part of that is to best position ourselves for another LGBTQ candidate, right? We don't want Pete to be the only candidate who ran in the next coming decades, right? Many people thought this was not possible, as I mentioned, and he did come from being a small town mayor in order to, and catapulting into viability. That's not a normal story. And so we understand that, you know, the breeding ground for presidents is governors, it's senators, it's high profile members of Congress, and it's also people who are in appointed office at a higher level, secretaries of state, secretaries of justice, so forth. And so the Victory Institute has really stepped up its project, its presidential appointments project, to say we need a justice, we need at least one cabinet member, probably more. We've never had a lesbian ambassador ever. We've never had trans ambassador ever. And we've only had, I believe, 5 to 6 openly LGBTQ ambassadors. And there's 250 some, you know, countries that have embassies. And so, you know, we've got a long way to go. And the Institute has put markers down to say, we really want a partner. And I think the Biden campaign obviously can't say yes or no to those things, but the Obama campaign was very much a partner when it came to this. And we think the Biden campaign would be as well. We obviously have made overtures to the Trump administration, right? who did appoint Rick Grinnell, to a temporary cabinet position and as an ambassador. But overall, the representation in that partnership when it comes to many of the vacant positions that exist in the administration that could have been filled with LGBTQ people that were here with their resumes, there was just no inclination to even engage.
All right, that's great. Yeah, no, obviously all of these successes would come with the trade-off by losing Richard Grinnell, which of course is a devastating thing for many of us. Bit of British sarcasm there. So let us move to Gabriel and his question.
Hi, Sean, thank you for your presentation, super interesting. My question is, based from your perspective, working or following hundreds or thousands of campaigns, what are the obstacles that LGBTQ candidates still face? Is it outright prejudice? Is it electability concerning the electorate? And on the other hand, why do you think some voters may be more likely today to support LGBTQ candidates rather than straight or cisgender candidates? Is it because of ideological cues? Maybe they're seen as more ideologically progressive. Is it because they are themselves a sign of progress, or other reason?
Yeah, well, the prejudice is absolutely a factor, right? And I think that what we're worried about this year with this uptick in homophobic rhetoric is it having a chilling effect on, countering the heat effect of folks saying, I want to step up and run. It's not mine to say, but I'll just say this. Corey Johnson just said that he's no longer going to be running for mayor of New York City. And I wouldn't be surprised if this was a factor, right? He would probably face some of the same kind of rhetoric that Richie Torres is facing right now, that Corey himself faced when he ran for speaker and for council, just amped up on a whole new level. We were disappointed to hear that, but we're worried about that. And the other thing is that, yes, there's definitely this idea, I would say overall, there's still a mindset, and I'll speak from the left, right? I'm a member of the Democratic National Committee. I just got elected. I'm the first gay first LGBTQ person elected from the state of Pennsylvania. We've been around since the beginning of the country. We've never sent an openly LGBTQ person to be on the DNC. And that's sad, right? That's really sad. And part of that is that LGBTQ candidates overall are underestimated, and they're not seen as competitive, right? We've heard misgivings. I'll leave the state nameless, but one of our candidates won their primary, and the Democratic caucus said, can you please step aside? We worry that they're going to use anti-LGBT stuff against you, and it's going to open you up and make you less competitive. And there's still that mindset. Jean Ortiz-Jones was underestimated in 2018. She should have won that race. People didn't think she had a chance because not only was she queer, she was young, she was a woman of color, she was a veteran, right? And she was a first-time candidate. And so those things can be very additive. And a lot of times when recruitment happens, right, there's still this idea that you need a straight, white, male, middle-aged professional who is the stereotypical candidate, because those folks have run, there's nothing new going to be unearthed unless they have a scandal of some sort that's in addition to their identity. When it comes to folks who have different identities, whether it's women, people of color, LGBTQ people, folks are worried that it's going to open up a new avenue of attack and undermine folks' campaigns. And so I'd say that continues to be a huge problem.
Great. Sean, I presume that anybody who would like to donate to the Victory Fund should just go to victoryfund.org. Is that the easiest way to do it?
That is the easiest way to do it. We have a federal PAC event coming up next week. We've got some amazing guests. Congressman Cicilline, who is the highest ranking LGBTQ person in congressional leadership. Currently, he's running for assistant leader, right? He'll be there along with a lot of other great folks. So yes, absolutely.
Great. Actually, if you want to stop the screen sharing now, we can see some of the gallery view and other people, and we can share your details as well. Before I ask Jack Bailey to give us the next question, I did wonder, and it sparked my interest because you mentioned Corey Johnson. Do you have any data or any feeling for the potential success of HIV positive candidates who are open about their HIV status? Obviously, that's been one of the biggest challenges in the world to see the representation of people who are HIV positive. Do you have any data or any anecdotal stories about that?
Yeah, obviously an important issue to the LGBTQ community. We do have folks who are elected. I don't have those numbers on me. I could probably get them. But that is kind of another avenue that, folks worry about being attacked on. There is a candidate in Virginia that we just endorsed. His opponent has started to bring up, there's a big controversy around water in the district. And they started to bring up the fact that he's HIV positive and that, it could taint the water, right? Just ridiculous, ludicrous things. But we still have a long way to go. I'll tell you a story from last night, actually, when it comes to this. The mindset still needs to change, right? We still can't donate blood, right? It's a huge issue. Chevron Jones that won a attack specifically around this. Even though he had COVID, he had the antibodies, he was restricted. But my mother told me a story, she watches Big Brother. And then apparently there's an HIV positive person who's on it. There's a secret guest or someone they're going to have. And she was posting on a forum and someone said, oh, it can't possibly be that person. They wouldn't bring him back. He's HIV positive. And it's just a mindset that people have. And sadly, there needs to be some education, but certainly can be co-opted by folks who are nefarious. It's not too dissimilar to trans candidates. There's still a lot of folks that don't understand, the identities of trans people and the issues that they face. And that's where we see a lot of attacks leading. There's groups that are actually planning or may plan to undermine swing voters. There's a big political article a few weeks ago around, the right wing's debate about whether or not they should weaponize trans people again. We saw this in Connecticut, and we might see it again, sadly, if things get pretty desperate for the GOP.
Right. Thank you. Jack Bailey.
Hi, Sean. Thanks very much again. I'd just like to echo what everyone else said. I thought it was really interesting. I've got quite a short question, so I'll just go ahead with it. Just speaking on behalf of some of the other people who are watching in the audience right now, who are political scientists, what are some of the questions that we could answer that would make your job easier?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues that we have is there's still a real lack of data on the actual identities and population percentage of openly LGBTQ people. The Williams Institute is the rules the roost when it comes to this and has done some work, but we just think that there's more, right? We have state by state numbers that they've put out. When it came to setting those goals for the Democratic convention, right? A lot of folks cited the state goals. The state based percentages. So like in North Dakota, it's 1.3%. I think it says. And so the Democratic Party took 1.3% and multiplied it out to get, 3 delegates or whatever it was. And so I do think that there's a need for better data when it comes to our representation in the general population. There's been a little bit more progress, right, from GLAAD, and I think a couple of the task force has done some work. But in the academic sphere, I think it'd be really interesting to delve into that. And then building off of that, right, when it comes to us as a voting bloc, we have a little bit of numbers from 16 and 18 and the Democratic primaries earlier this year, but they're mostly extrapolations out from, exit polls. They're not really that scientifically, or academic. They wouldn't hold up to a lot of scrutiny, I think. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. Certainly, I don't know if you get anything stood up for this year, but, when it comes to the actual idea of how many of us there are out there, because some people think there's a lot more, as I do, and some people think that we're overestimating, which I don't think is true at all. So I think that'd be really, really helpful.
Great. Let's take Joanna's question.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Sean, for this. My question is related back to a previous one, particularly on lower levels of trans support for a candidate like Pete Buttigieg. And so we know that Super Tuesday polls, for instance, showed a broader queer constituency backing Bernie Sanders, likely because of his signature policies that made him stand out, like Medicare for All and other programs. that would benefit a population that we know is disproportionately poor, disproportionately underinsured by healthcare in the context of healthcare. So I guess my question is then, how does the Victory Fund plan or work to reconcile these tensions between material demands of its presumed constituency and descriptive representation, especially given these plans that you've mentioned about running a future presidential candidate?
Yeah. Well, I think I also did not necessarily answer Jack's question fully as well around the idea of, people being supportive of openly LGBTQ people. I think there is a level of empathy that many people feel in our community because they are a minority when it comes to, their viewpoints. And we do track most of our candidates running. They are Democrats, they are liberal Democrats, progressive Democrats. We endorse across the spectrum, obviously. But we do find that folks who are running as, I would say DSA folks, more on the left, upset the cart, right? Kind of a revolution kind of rhetoric of Bernie, are people who have been at odds with society as it's currently structured, right? So people who are racial minorities, people who are transgender people, right? The ability to say this system is broken and we need to fix it through a macro kind of, change, I think is something that tracks really well with that mindset that the society is broken. And so I think that we've seen many more folks run this year who do identify with, Bernie Sanders as democratic socialists. And a lot of those folks are, queer people of color or transgender people. And I think that we obviously don't have, strong policy positions, right, when it comes to healthcare, right, and all these other, the environment, guns, those kind of things. But we normally find that folks are very much aligned on the left side of the spectrum. And so we really think that we need to continue to build the base, right? We had some big local wins for trans candidates, and the Institute actually has a bunch of programs that specifically focus towards building the pipeline of trans people in government. So internships on Capitol Hill, fellowships around the country to help make sure that folks are in the pipeline to run for office. We're going to see some more of the fruits of those programs, I think, next year at the local level, when we have a lot of folks, running at the local level. But to build up towards someone being a trans person being in Congress, we need to have someone who's in the state Senate, right? Like Sarah McBride just is poised to be, or Danica Rome, right? That kind of thing. That pipeline is behind the pipeline, I would say, of cisgender queer people. Victory is going to continue to work to build it. And if you know anyone who wants to run, hit us up as well.
Fabulous. There's a couple of minutes left, and I thought the webinar might be quite interested in. I'm going to share my screen for a second, and hopefully Sean will be. Maybe I'm not going to share that. It's not coming up here, but I'm just working on a paper for the UN's consultation on the status of women, and they've asked me to look at the representation by gender and gender identity within the LGBTQ community. So this question about how likely is it that the representatives that are in elected office globally are cisgendered or trans women compared to cisgendered men or trans men. And interestingly, I'll share it with people online, but the global parliamentarians are 25% women, cisgender women and trans women, 75% men. That's the global picture. But in the states, in the US state legislatures today, it's almost 50-50. Something around 46% are self-identified lesbians as state house members, and then are trans women representatives, and a few bisexual, pansexual women in the state house. So I'm going to take that as testament to the success of the Victory Fund and the diversification of candidates. But it's a very different picture in the US state legislatures today than it is globally. I know on my screen 100% of our parliamentarians here are women, but that's just because Liz has joined us. But outside of that, it's really, as you would expect, a very gay male-dominated world. But in the US, for some reason, and I take this as a glass half full, the small number of state legislators are pretty balanced between men and women, and not by ethnicity or race per se, but just by gender. So that's an interesting difference there. Okay, with that little editorializing, I want to thank Sean very much for this fabulous presentation. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing and will be doing over the next few weeks. We will try and share the Victory Fund's donation pages and obviously the list of candidates who are running, so we know what to look for on election night. If anybody would like further information about Victory, either contact Sean directly or we can put you in contact with them, who do a fabulous job in training, not just candidates in America, but now globally as well in the global south. So thank you all for being here. Next week, as I said, we have Brian Harrison and Melissa Michelson talking about their book. If you'd like to be on the spring list of presenters, please send me a note as well. But otherwise, we will see you next Thursday, and everybody keep well and keep safe. And thank you again, Sean.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.